Hi, and now we're in Lifestyle Management, Chapter 6, Managing Your Weight, and it's Part 1. And so in this chapter, we're going to manage our weight is something that many people are conscious of on a daily basis. Others don't give it a thought at all. So learning about nutrition issues, accepting responsibility for your own food choices, and planning for a lifetime of healthy eating can be both empowering and exciting. So the first part, we're going to focus on the issues of obesity, particularly some of the causes. And we'll also explore a popular question. How much should I weigh? And we'll finish part 1 with some of the health dangers of excessive weight. So let's proceed and begin with part 1 of managing your weight. Okay, we're going to begin by looking at the global obesity epidemic. And it's an epidemic because a lot of the population of the world is becoming a little more affluent and is eating a little bit more. Since 1980, obesity rates have more than doubled around the world. Now, the results are from Statistics Canada. In 2014, the data revealed that 20.2% of the Canadian adults were obese. Now, we have to be aware that what is obese in our imagination when we think about that and what is obese by medical standards can oftentimes be two different things. So we're going to look at the term of obesity and look at that as being what more medically and not necessarily what we might imagine it to be. The lowest obesity rates were found in BC and Quebec. And so it's just an interesting kind of phenomenon that in an affluent country, it's not surprising that people might eat more, but is that the cause of obesity, or are there other implications? And we're going to consider some of those as well. In 2014, nearly 42 million children under the age of 5 were overweight in the world. 42 million. The increasing number of overweight and obese Canadians now poses one of the greatest threats ever to public health in our country, while the quest for thinness has become a national obsession. So it seems kind of peculiar, doesn't it, that we would not be able to manage our weight particularly well to the point of establishing high watermarks for obesity, and yet we're particularly concerned about how we're supposed to look and this pursuit of thinness. Each year, millions of Canadians go on diets. No matter how much they lose, 90 to 95% regain the extra pounds within 5 years. And so our compulsion, if you will, towards dieting is meant to be a quick fix, let's get her done, bring the weight down, and then leave it alone, rather than what this focus of this course is looking at. It's lifestyle management over time. It's not something that can be a quick fix. So what causes obesity? Well, there are many reasons for the growing obesity issues, and we're going to explore several of them. These are certainly not the be-all and end-all, and it doesn't exhaust the kind of causes there may in fact be. Number 1, we're eating more calories. We're bombarded by non-stop commercials and tempted by tasty treats. Many people are consuming more calories per day than they need, or more importantly, than they're burning off. 2, well, we tend to have bigger portions. Many restaurants and packaged foods have increased 2 to 5 times the size in the last 20 years. You know, the supersize me phenomenon. 3, fast food. People who eat frequently at fast food restaurants gain more weight and develop metabolic abnormalities. Now, that's not to say all fast food establishments are bad. Certainly there's an increased movement in fast food facilities to provide healthier alternatives, but it is convenient. It seems to be in our faces a lot, and we will frequent those locations and get that kind of food because it's momentarily tasty. The long-term associated negative effects is that they're high caloric, a lot of their calories are coming from fat. We'll look at number 4, hunger and satiety. Now, part of what's at play here are hormones which may stimulate or suppress hunger. And the size of the fat cells may affect how hungry we feel. And there'll be more on that a little bit later. Physical inactivity is another point. Canadians are not exercising enough. It's not to say that people aren't exercising, we're just not exercising as much as a population compared to the rate of obesity, which is climbing. Another point, passive entertainment. TVs, computers, iPads, and other technologies decrease the time spent engaged in physical activities and increase food consumption, eating while you're doing these sorts of things. And this is even starting earlier with very young children who have access to many devices before they're 2 years old. Playing on an iPhone, playing on an iPad, and getting into that sort of rhythm that this is how you entertain and this is what's desirable. Now, another factor that can play a role is prenatal factors. Now, women's weights before conception and weight gain during pregnancy can influence a woman's child's weight. So some of that is it's teaching through example in some cases. And then there are developmental factors. This is what I was mentioning about satiation and hormones. The developmental factors can be influenced by hyperplasia and hypertropia. Now, these are important influences in obesity. You can check your textbook for these. It's regarding cell size and cell number. So, when we're thinking in regards to these different issues, of course we have to consider genetics. The GAD2, GAD2, and the OB genes may predispose individuals to weight gain and obesity. There aren't clear-cut relationships of genetics and obesity, but there may be some links there. And then another issue is one that we probably all can recognize. It's emotional influences. You know, some people who are emotionally affected and cope differently may cope by overeating. Sadness, frustrations, emotional upheavals oftentimes return to something as a way of coping, and one of those things that we turn to a lot is eating. Our social networks is another variable. Friends that we may have a significant outcome or a significant effect on our risk for obesity. Maybe we are with a lot of people who aren't physically active themselves and maybe engage in social activities that revolve around fast food restaurants. And so who we hang with might influence some of our effects. Some other social determinants. People who live in lower socioeconomic classes tend to be more obese than in affluent countries. And it might be that education could be a factor here. So it's important when we think about obesity, it's not a single cause issue. And as I've expressed in many other of my classes, when we talk about research, one of the areas that's important to recognize is what's called a co-effect or a coefficient effect. And this isn't to say there's cause and effect. In a lot of cases, things like obesity, there isn't a single cause. But there are other variables that when we see obesity occur, we see these other variables present. We don't know exactly what the relationship is, whether it's cause and effect or some other influence that they have. So they are correlational, and these are all correlational. So what should I weigh? Well, that's the age-old question, and is there really any right answer? There is no single best weight. However, there is a range of healthy weight to compare against. The best weights have been somewhat of a moving target. They've changed over time, if you will. Depending upon what generation you're from, you come to understand what is a reasonable weight, and it's changed over time. And so it's a bit of a moving target. And now while researchers gain more insight into what is health, and therefore what is a healthy in terms of weight, we're still determining what that can in fact be based on size. But one method, it's known as the body mass index, the BMI. Now the body mass index, it's a ratio between weight and height, It's a mathematical formula that correlates with body fat. You calculate your body mass index by dividing your weight in kilograms by your height in meters squared. Now, that's not something everybody does. So there is in your textbook an example of the BMI chart, and I'll walk you through a little bit of that in a second. Doctors, health professionals, and personal trainers use this BMI to identify weight-related health risks in populations and individuals. There are health risks associated with underweight categories as well as overweight categories. And when you look at underweight category for a BMI, it's anybody with a BMI under 18.5, and some of the risks here include undernutrition, osteoporosis, and infertility. Now, the health risks associated with overweight and obesity, that's with a BMI of 25 or higher, and this includes type 2 diabetes, hypertension, sleep apnea, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers. Now, BMI has limitations. Muscular individuals may be incorrectly categorized as overweight or obese. It doesn't reliably reflect body fat, and it's not useful for growing children, women who are pregnant or nursing, or for the elderly. Now, here's where I'll just walk you through a bit of an example on the chart beside me here. Using me as an example, now I'm 190 centimeters, 6'3". I weigh 97.5 kilograms, that's 215 pounds, and that makes my BMI a 27, which puts me in the category of overweight. Now, in order for me to get into the upper level of normal, I need a BMI of 24. I need to lose 12.5 kilograms or 27.5 more pounds. Now, at one point in my past, I was 6'3", and I did weigh years ago 185 pounds. I felt so weak. I didn't feel full of energy. I was running triathlons and my training was going miserably. So when I put the weight back on to about 210, I found my energy return. I found that I was more, felt stronger. I continued doing triathlons, and in fact, I completed 48 triathlons at 215 to 210 pounds in that ballpark of an area. And so for me, the BMI that I'm at 27 is not overweight, but it's appropriate for my body size. It could be bone density and the size of bones. It could be muscularity. It could be age. And so it's important that with your BMI, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's a good guide. Okay? So it's important when doing these things to bear that in mind. Now, there's another method that's used, and it's called our waist circumference. Waist circumference is used along with the BMI as a practical indicator or risk that is associated with excessive abdominal fat. And so there's, you'll find that in that little image there as to whether or not apple or pear. Now, a waist circumference of equal to or greater than 102 centimeters, that's for Caucasian men, greater to or equal to or greater than 90 centimeters for Asian men, 88 centimeters for Caucasian women, and greater than or equal to 80 centimeters for Asian women is associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. The distribution of weight is important in terms of its location of this excess fat is critical. People who have more of an apple-shaped body are more likely than those with pear-shaped bodies to have higher cholesterol levels, higher blood pressure, and an increased risk of diabetes. Now, a third method is what's called the waist to hip ratio, the WHR. Now, this ratio is determined by dividing your waist circumference by your hip circumference. And the key here is that with a WHR greater than 1 for men or 0.85 for women is considered a sign of higher risk for disease. And so these are rough guidelines. They vary from person to person a bit, but they give you some rough idea. Now, along this line, you might be wondering, well, how is body fat assessed? If I'm determine that I have additional body fat? How do they assess how much should I have and how much should I try to lose? Now, there are essential fats which make up about 3 to 7% of the body fat in men and 10 to 15% of the body fat in women. Now, it's important to note at this point that when we see these differences in terms of body fat, in this instance, between men and women, and men's seems to be smaller than women, it's partly the difference between what gives women the shape that seems to be still within the realm of healthiness, and having what makes women women and men men in regards to physical shape and in terms of the body's ability to maintain and hold on to fat. Now, the second type of fat is what's known as storage fat. And for healthy adults, this is somewhere between 5 and 25% for men, and for women between 16 and 35%. Now, there are several methods for assessing body composition, and these include, these are included, in fact, in your textbook on page 141. And I'll just sort of go through them kind of quickly to give you a thought on them, and there are graphics here to show you a bit about what they look like. Now, the skin fold measurement, it's a fairly common one, and maybe you've had this done. It's a caliper is used to measure the amount of skin folds in specific areas on the body, and that's how it's used to calculate fat. The second method is the bioelectrical impedance analysis, and this uses a BIA analyzer where a low level of electrical current is passed through the body, and the impedance, the Z, or the opposition to the flow of the current, is what's measured, and that gives us a reading about body fat in our bodies. Now, a third method is what's called dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, the DXA. The X-rays are used to quantify the skeletal and soft tissue components of body mass. Now, hydrostatic is a pretty popular one as well, and this is this hydrostatic weighing is measuring the weight of displacement in fluid. So you're put in a tank, and the amount of water you displace helps us understand fat composition. The air displacement plethysmography is the total body volume is measured from air displacement. Okay, now you'll find those on page 141. So the next question that might arise was, well, how many calories do I need? Well, again, this is not as simple as you need 3,000 calories, 2,500 calories, 1,500 calories. The EER, or the estimated energy requirement, is dietary energy intake that is predicted to maintain energy balance in a healthy adult. You'll find this on page 142. Now, most of our daily caloric expenditure, about 90%, occurs because of resting metabolic rate. The remaining 10% of energy expenditure is defined as exercise metabolic rate, which comes from all types of daily physical activity. It doesn't mean we have to be working out on a regular basis. It really just means that we need to be moving. And if we're moving, it's above resting metabolic rate. So, some of the dangers, health dangers of excessive weight. Most of these we're probably fairly familiar with. The younger the individual are when they gain weight, the more health risks they face over their lifetime. So if you were overweight as a child and you maintain that overweightness, that puts you at a higher risk than someone who gained the weight later in life. A higher chance of becoming overweight or obese throughout life when we are old, when we have extra weight as a child. A greater likelihood of high total cholesterol levels and other cardiovascular diseases risks, such as elevated blood pressure. There's a higher prevalence of type 2 diabetes. And the nice thing about type 2 diabetes, if there's a positive side to it, is that it's correctable. Increased risk of premature death and physiological changes that are equivalent to 20 years of aging over a lifetime. So instead of living till 80, in some cases that drops your age mortality rate to 60. So many chronic diseases and serious health issues have been linked to being overweight or obese. The incidence of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer, and other health problems, and premature death have increased with the degree of overweight in both sexes. And you'll find this in more detail on page 143 to 144 in your textbook. In our calorie-conscious and thinness-obsessed society, obesity also affects quality of life, including a sense of vitality and our experience of physical pain. And so most of us are fully aware of these kinds of health risks as it relates to being overweight and really overweight. I hope this has been helpful. Part 2 will follow with a little bit more focus on some of the fad diets or diet issues that we've often looked at, and what are some of the eating disorders that are associated. All right, everybody, carry on the good work. Bye for now.